I think something that we implement that has been the most helpful is we have something called a trial day where we get people to work with us and they spend time with us. And instead of us asking them questions, we say, all right, come in for a day and work with us on a real problem. There's teams, there's other people. I'm still playing on the field every day, but there's a bit more of the coach element. Then it became like mostly coach, where it was like, okay, now I'm thinking about, Brian Chesky said this, the product is now the company.
All right, hi guys. Welcome to Scaling Today, the podcast where we explore the future of work and how companies scale. So I'm your host Yu Ying Deng, and today we have an exciting episode lined up for you. So our guest is Moses Low. He's the CEO and the co-founder of Xendit, which is a leading payment gateway solution in Southeast Asia, and presumably soon the world as well. So I've known Moses for close to, I think, 2 years by now, and I've always been impressed by the level of thoughtfulness that he has while building Xendit. Very excited to have him here on the podcast today. Xendit has been growing at 25% month on month for the past 2 years. This is what I saw from their website. And they also process millions of transactions monthly. So, on the topic of scaling, I think I can say that Moses is the master. Right. Welcome to the show, Moses. Would you like to say a few words to our audience?
Thanks so much for having me. I guess I'll do a quick intro about us as a business. So we are a payments business all throughout Southeast Asia, processing about 45 billion US dollars across Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Singapore. Proud to serve a bunch of startups and tech companies and have grown with the tech industry as the region has grown. Proud to be from Southeast Asia, but raised mostly from Silicon Valley for the region and broken a bunch of bamboo ceilings in doing so. I think for most of our investors like YC, Excel, Kleiner, Tiger Co2 Insight, we're their first or their biggest investment into the region. So proud of that too. And thanks for having me here. Excited to chat more.
All right. So, Moses, to start with, can you share a bit about your background? So, I know that you grew up in different countries. Very interesting background. So, tell us a bit about it. What inspired you to co-found Xendit, and what was your initial vision for the company?
Yeah, so my mom's from Indonesia, my dad's from Malaysia, born in Singapore, then Penang, then Australia, then the US, then Indonesia. So kind of all over the place, always been a third culture kid and always been a bit of a foreigner wherever I am.
Hmm.
Two, two Asian in America and two American in Asia. But that's okay, I think, if we've tried to turn those weaknesses into a strength over time.
Hmm.
But I think that kind of formation or that third culture childhood uh, gave me opportunities I wouldn't have otherwise. I'm thankful for it. And one of those is learning early on that I really like the idea of finance. Apparently, I said to my dad, he's the one that recounts this story to me. He said, I told him around when I was 12 or 13, Dad, I want to buy a bank one day. So finance was always in my mind, even though I
Close
didn't
to it
quite know.
now.
Close to it now, yes. And so I did finance and information systems undergrad, which
Hmm.
is around fintech. Always wanted to do that. In Australia at the time, there wasn't a ton of startups going on. So joined BCG, did management consulting. Out of
Hmm.
that, didn't get fired, so ended up going to business school. And really wanted to learn and want to go Silicon Valley and learn how tech works, how startups work,
Hmm.
and how this kind of massive value creation engine has worked. I took a lot of lessons there, really changed my mind and reformatted how my brain works. And then it was time to, I really wanted to come home and build something for the region, build something that could, I can't change the world, but it can change our little part of the world maybe.
Hmm.
And so wanted to make something that would change not just the industry that we work in, but then also hopefully there's this idea of the PayPal mafia. I'd love it one day to be a Senate mafia, people that spawn new ideas
Oh,
after
yeah,
their time at
that would be
Senate.
cool. Spawn and
Yeah.
fund new ideas after
Spawn,
that.
yes. Then I can just retire maybe and invest in all the employees and have them start amazing companies.
Wow, wow. Okay, I look forward to the day happening. Okay, so Xendit originally started, I think, with more B2C, Venmo-like kind of a business model, right? And then you pivoted to B2B payments after that. So what initially drove that shift? And, do you think that it really helped you to fit it better into Southeast Asia's kind of like fintech appetite and fintech market?
Yes, so we won an Andreessen Horowitz sponsored Berkeley versus Stanford Bitcoin hackathon
Mm-hmm.
with the idea of using crypto to move money for domestic workers from let's say Hong Kong to Indonesia. We
Okay.
got into YC with that idea. I think one of the few or the first kind of crypto ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 weeks in, realized we were failing pretty epically, had no users. So we
Mm-hmm.
then shifted to, uh, well, we had this idea from a guy called Justin Khan, one of our mentors, who said, why don't you try launch Venmo for Indonesia? And Venmo is
Mm-hmm.
kind of an e-wallet.
Yep.
And so we launched it within a week, got 16,000 users, but then 6 months later pivoted to what we do today, which is B2B, on the B2B side, payments infrastructure for the region.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it was, we had this passion around, we wanted to solve something for Southeast Asia. And then we had to fail a few times before we realized what might work. And we
Mm-hmm.
only realized B2B would work because a friend said, I will pay you if you create these APIs. And I was like, oh, that sounds like the very beginning of product market fit, maybe.
But with 16,000 users, wouldn't you consider that product market fit as well?
Well, we were doing the classic consumer strategy. I think what's the unwritten rule of fintech consumer is that you gain users by giving away money. And
Mm.
PayPal has, one of the PayPal mafia has written a book, and you can literally follow page by page
Mm-hmm.
the formula. And so I would say to the team, guys, today we're on page number 18, tomorrow we're on page number 19, and
Mm-hmm.
working ourselves through. But I figured that the e-wallet game, you needed to be the source of funds or have easy access to the source of funds. I think all the
Mm-hmm.
e-wallets around the world that won accomplish those things, and I didn't think that we would be the right player to win that over the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought, let's go do something where we can be number one. I get the strategy of being number two, number three in a region or in an industry, but for me, I wanted to go build things where we could be number one.
Okay, well, it looks like you're close to that already. So, Moses, I was reading a bit about Xendit during the times of COVID as well, right? And I thought it was like pretty interesting that you guys not only managed to weather COVID quite well, but you also launched new services and you actually expanded internationally during that same time. So, what gave you this confidence to push forward with growth when so many other companies were pulling back? And how do you think that this changed your business?
It was a more luck than it was strategy. The only strategy is I think Sunza has this idea that if you burn all the boats of retreat, your army will fight better. And so what
Was that
happened
from
during?
Troy or something?
No, I think that's Sunza, and I think in Red Cliffs has made that into a movie.
Oh, yes, yes,
Um,
yes.
in any case, the version for us was we went into COVID. We were Indonesia only at the time,
Mhm.
and we were 50% travel and
Oh,
50%
50%
lending,
travel. That's
something
a
like that.
terrible
Yeah,
market to be in during COVID.
for COVID. It was a great market to be in before, and travel was booming in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Uh, So come COVID, I think over a 2 month period, our revenues dropped 90%.
Oh, that's
So
crazy.
we were facing existential crisis, uh, but we had no option but to try survive.
Hmm.
And Warren Buffett has this great idea of being greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. Now, it's
Hmm.
often very easy to say, very hard to implement. In our case, we had no choice but to implement. So we said, let's do something crazy. We need to diversify. We need new industries, and let's go diversify geographically. So we'd launched Philippines in April or May 2020. Remote team, remote
Hmm.
office.
Hmm.
Philippines weren't allowed to leave their house.
Hmm.
And then within 2 or 3 years, we were the um, number one player for what we did. So it was kind of launching when no one else was kind of operating or investing and saying, hey,
Hmm.
let's be a bit greedy.
Hmm.
Uh, and within 9 months, so within 1 year, we were back to all-time highs across the business, and from a whole new customer set because travel hadn't come back 9 months after COVID started.
So, what was the new customer segment that pulled things up again?
Yeah, we had tapped a lot more into, so telcos was new for us at the time. We opened a category called digital products, which encompasses a lot of things, but started trying to chase things that we thought would do well during COVID: food
Hmm.
delivery, online services,
Mm.
e-commerce, these kinds of things that we thought would do well, and managed to latch on to a lot of the platforms that were trying to serve those industries as well, and these kind of new economy things.
Mm.
So that kind
Yep.
of brought us through COVID. And then after COVID, it's been a whole bunch of different businesses.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. And now you guys are not just in the Philippines and Indonesia, right? But in a whole bunch of other countries.
Yeah, we just launched Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam in the last couple of years. And then we want to cover the whole Southeast Asia in the next couple of years.
Yeah, we're waiting for you guys to come into Singapore.
Me too.
Okay, all right. And I do know that you have some interesting thoughts on this, right? So, Moses, Xendit operates with a distributed team across like several countries here in Southeast Asia. And I believe also in the US and some parts of Europe as well. You do have some people. So, what led you to adopt this kind of setup, and how do you think it has benefited your company's growth, if it has?
Yeah, it's been an interesting choice for us. We've looked stupid sometimes and looked smart other times, so we're always in between. Uh, we started distributed because always one of the four co-founders was in the US, and so we just kind of
Mm-hmm.
had to be distributed. What turned out to work nicely from those early days, though, was that someone was naturally awake all the time. So in in Southeast Asia, where your payments infrastructure, your banks are going down, or your payment methods are going down every day, having someone who's just naturally awake to deal with those things was actually pretty helpful. So it helped
Mm-hmm.
in that way from day one. We also then made some choices. We said over time we want to be a regional business. So we needed to make some choices that were regional. And I think we've seen that from, if we think of a game theory perspective, we've seen other businesses in Southeast Asia where a business opts to be very good in one country, and then
Mm-hmm.
others who've been opted to be very good across the region, but it means they're maybe subpar in every market.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we said, hey, we want to be more like some of these regional businesses. So we're happy to only be kind of 80% good in one country, but be able to be 80% good in every country versus
Mm-hmm.
100% good in one country, but 50% good in others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we made decisions like Slack is in English and we speak in English at the office. We made decisions like we we have we run meetings like Amazon 6-pager, so it means that when you
Mm-hmm.
show up for the first 10 minutes, you're totally silent and you're just reading a document and you're commenting on that document. But it gives the quietest person in the room as loud a voice as the loudest person in the room because
Mm-hmm.
it all comments on Google Docs and then we discuss after that. So we made a bunch of decisions that were around trying to what we thought was solve for adaptability. Also, by
Mm-hmm.
having people in many different countries on a development team, when we create a product, let's say virtual account, that means a different thing in Indonesia than it does in Thailand, than it does in Vietnam. So having
Yep.
someone who can say, how does it make sense to call this thing, word this thing, what does the API look like, and having representation matters. So it's solved for adaptability. I think it looked dumb from kind of 2015 to 2020 because it was inefficient. It looked really smart from 2020 to 2022
I
as
mean, you
everyone was
guys were
going.
early adopters, right, of like this. Before, I guess remote work was even a term, like, or distributed work was even a term. You guys were doing it.
Unfortunately. And then, or fortunately, I don't know, TBD. And then now we look dumb again now that everyone's going back to the office and we have some, our version of it. So I think we've grown up this way, so we've learned to operate this way. We actually, I think, over time want to. We're always trying to figure out what's the right balance for us
Mm-hmm.
as we kind of pulsate between the two ends of remote and fully in the office. We'll always be somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm. So right now, is it hybrid for Xendit, like throughout the countries you're in?
Yeah, we're hybrid. Each country is a little bit different, actually. With some countries where it's 5 days in the office, and some where it's closer to the other way. So it's a little bit flexible depending on the country's needs. I think that's always been part of our goal. It's like we're very nuanced to understanding local markets and how we
Mm.
should be operating in those markets.
Mm. Okay, got it. And Moses, we had an interesting conversation about this before. I do remember what you're telling me. But when it comes to managing a distributed team across different countries, it can be challenging to find the right person, right? Right kind of talent. So, how do you ensure that you're recruiting the right person for your company?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. I forgot what I told you last time, so we'll see if it's the same.
Let's see
But
whether you recall it now.
yeah, I think something that we implement that has been the most helpful is we have something called a trial day where we get
Hmm.
people to work with us for at least one day. The more senior, the longer. Senior people can be up to a week. And they spend time with us. And instead of us asking them questions, or in banking was a super day where you have 8 people ask you questions. In consulting, you get a case study. We say, all right, come in for a day and work with us on a real problem. So
Hmm.
let's say you're coming in for a sales role. The question would just be, give us, how would you go sell this vertical? Or what would you do if you want to become the new head of sales? Um, and instead of us interviewing you, we give you 5, 6 people, some senior people, some junior people, and you ask them questions. And then by the end of the day, you're coming up with, here's what I would do. And then we always
Mm.
bias, and we're open about this. We want to be biased towards action. So some of the best sales trial days we've had is when someone said, I talked to 10 of my friends. One is down to use Send It. Who can I refer
Hmm.
him to?
Mm.
Very actionable, very execution focused. Love that. So that's been very good in kind of trying to find the right people, and in doing so, it helps us solve for a lot of other things. We put junior people on the call, and we don't tell the senior person they're junior. But if the senior person treats them badly, we know exactly what we think about that person.
Okay.
Uh, we also then, I think, by working on real problems, then it's not some contrite artificial idea. It's a real problem that we're facing today
Hmm.
and trying to solve. So it's helped us solve for cultural nuances, how people treat others, and whether they can actually execute, and whether they have a bias for action. Helps us determine those things very quickly.
Yep. So I tried implementing that in SFL actually, and for the
Oh,
people who would attend the trial day, it was actually really good because you get to see them live in action, like before anything else, right? You don't need to experiment during the probation period. However, I did find that many people would say, "Oh, I can't take a day off," or like just reject that idea altogether. So did you have that issue as well, like when you were asking people to come down and they said, "No, I
yes.
can't."
Yes. So that was the biggest objection, and people were like, "That's stupid. No one's going to take the time." I'm an
Hmm.
engineer. I have 5 different job offers from unicorns. Why would I take the
Exactly.
time to do this?
Yep.
And we said, if you're going to spend 2 years with us, you're not willing to spend one day to figure out if it's worth spending the time. Then do you
Hmm.
really want this job? And if you don't, that's okay. There's plenty of
Hmm.
places where you can be a code monkey, and that is your life. But we said, if you want to be on this journey with us, then you got to decide, like, before you marry, and 2 years is not quite marriage, but we have people who've been here 6 7 years. Like, before you get into a long term relationship, maybe go on one date. Um,
Hmm.
and is 6 or 8 hours really that hard? We also do weekends. We also do public holidays, so we're flexible. Um, and so what we do is it self selects for the right kind of person. So I had an
That's
engineer
true.
tell
Yeah.
me that, and this is a good example of self selection, is he decided to do the trial, in this case, fresh out of uni, and he was doing the trial. I was like, this is the hardest interview I've ever done. Like,
Hmm.
he's like, I don't know if I can finish this task. And he was thinking of giving up at lunchtime because it was just
Hmm.
too hard. Um, what we don't always tell people is sometimes we make the tasks purposely very, very difficult to see who
Or
will
maybe even
persevere.
impossible, right? Yeah.
I don't think any are impossible, but yes, like very hard because we want to see like who has the determination to keep going even when it seems hopeless. Anyway, this guy was about to give up, and then he's like,
Hmm.
you know what? If this is the minimum standard to get into the company, then the standard's really high. And
Hmm.
even if I can't make it, I want to see if I'm good enough to be able to make it into this organization.
Okay.
And
Interesting. Yeah.
and it's not something that we solved for, but pretty interesting kind of insight from the other end. Now he made it in, but he was like, yeah, he determined at the point of giving up to try again because it meant the quality of the organization was high. So
Mm.
it does mean that we spend more time at the front convincing people to join. It
Hmm.
means there's more due diligence on whether they want to join us. So there's a
Hmm.
lot more kind of upfront work that has to be done, and maybe it's more painful per person. But it also means like by the time they say yes, they really know what they're signing up for. So I think we have
Mm.
less of the like in Indonesia. I think we used to have a lot of folks who would come in and disappear after a month, whereas I think
Mm.
a lot of that due diligence has been done beforehand, which I think has other benefits down the line.
Yep. And definitely as Xendit gains in reputation as well as being a good employer, it just gets easier, to get people in through the door to spend it one day with you, right?
Yeah, it's much easier now than it was 7 years ago.
Sure. I'm sure. Several years ago, it was probably just you in the office. Okay, and right now, like I guess a bit more of a personal question, right, Moses? So as Xendit has scaled, how do you think your role as a founder has evolved? Right, because you probably went from, in the beginning when it was just you and your other co-founders, it was like hand-to-hand combat, whereas now you're managing a company that has a few hundred employees, right? So how do you think your role as a founder has evolved, and like how have you adapted as a leader?
Yeah, I'll think of it as like 4 different parts, and
Hmm?
these are a bit like football terms. But I think it started off your hand-to-hand combat is like you're a player on the field, you're selling every single day. I'm
Hmm.
trying to make product. I'm answering customer support issues, um, and actively doing that every day. Then it became kind of player coach, as we kind of call it, got to 50, 100 or so,
Hmm.
where it became like there's teams, there's other people. I'm still playing on the field every day, but there's a bit more of the coach element. Then it became like mostly coach, where it was like, okay, now I'm thinking about. Then it starts to be Brian Chesky said this.
Mm-hmm.
The Your product is now the company. Your product is not what your
Your
company
product is
makes.
now the company. Okay.
The product that
Interesting.
you have to think about as a product manager is the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was pretty insightful to be the switch of like, because for someone like me who likes like hates idea of politics, hates like silos, hates talking about people and interactions and all that stuff. Um, Once I got the click of like, okay, the product now is the company, then that enabled me to find more fulfillment in the work that isn't the work, but all the people stuff, all the HR stuff, all the process stuff. So that was more coach. So that's the third
Mm-hmm.
phase where I was like, now I'm more purely coach and I'm managing a few different teams and there's competent people under me. I'd say now this is, I don't know, in football terms, the manager role, um, where they're in charge of the whole institution. But my life
Mm-hmm.
now is mix of manager plus, unfortunately, management consultant. Back to those shoes
Manager,
again. In this,
management consultant. Like how does that
yes,
how does the consultant bit come about?
yeah. I was just thinking about this today because it happened. We made a deck like so. Um, I think
You
my
made a
job is
deck.
like I get things that no one else wants to solve or can't solve. So the
Mm-hmm.
problems that no one else wants to or no one else can solve ends up on my plate, or when people just ask for help. So with a situation when exec a P&L owner is looking at something, there's so many burning things they're trying to fix,
Mm-hmm.
and there's things that they can fix and are best placed to fix. There's other things where someone else could potentially fix, and so they asked me for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came in uh, and spoke to a whole bunch of people in the team, came up with a bunch of ideas, and because I'm an ex-consultant, wrote it in a deck. So it felt very consulting-like as we were kind of presenting this deck and saying, "Hey, dear exec, are these the problems that you see? Here's the fixes I'm thinking about. Do you agree that those are the fixes?" We go and argue and debate, and then we go execute. So, but instead of management consulting, where it's like 8 weeks to come with the answer, it's like 2 days in startup speed. So I think maybe that's the difference. And I don't get paid as much as BCG did.
No,
So
but you're providing a service, right, to your team members. That's
providing service
fantastic.
to members. So I think that's the role now is like, I mean, that's the fun part. I love diving in deep. I love getting into the details and executing changes. And I think we can see the needle move. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm learning to love all the bigger company stuff too. Setting budgeting, looking at controls, looking at P&L, all the investor relations stuff. So I think that's most of my job these days is thinking about the company as a product and what will make the product, i.e., the company, better. Brian
Mm.
just gave another one, which is whenever you see a problem, what is the one thing you can do that can fix that problem and 10 other problems at the same time?
Oh wow.
So it
Oh, that's
became,
deep. Okay.
yeah, it's useful questions because there's always problems that you see, and then you have to be like, what's the meta problem there? How was that mess up allowed to happen? What's broken in the process? Okay, a human messed up, but why was that human allowed to mess up? Or why does that human
Mm.
exist in that position? Or what context is that human existing in?
Mm.
And then seeing what
Mm.
you can change there. So uh, yeah, I think these bigger questions are pretty interesting guides for how I should be running at this stage. At the same
Okay.
time, I love talking to customers. I love talking to real humans. So I still spend a good chunk of time doing that. But most of my job has to be the company now.
Well, I guess you never grow out of your product hat, right? Like whether it's like the product or the company as a product.
Yes, because I think I was feeling very discouraged when I was like, oh, this like dealing with people, dealing with human emotions is so frustrating and annoying versus just talking to customers and building stuff that customers use. That's much more satisfying. But this
Maybe, yeah,
change
maybe
in
one
lens
day when you
helps.
start thinking about people as a product, like that could change as well.
Yes, yes, yes. That's true.
That's what kids are for. Yeah.
That's what kids are for. Yes, indeed.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Moses, for the interview today. Like, is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners about scaling up a distributed team? Because obviously, like you've done it.
Yeah, one, I don't know if I've done it, but I've tried. I think one meta thing that has been really helpful to me
Mm-hmm.
has been building a set of mentors. And I don't think we do this enough in Southeast Asia. I think we're too scared to share ideas or confess our weaknesses. And I
Mm-hmm.
understand there's not everyone that we can go to about that. But a framework I've always had is to keep mentors 2 years ahead, 5 years ahead, and 10 years ahead. And
2 years,
having
5 years, and 10 years. Okay.
And that's been really helpful. The 10 years or 20 years ones have been able to say, I saw this recession. I went through 1998. I went through 15% inflation, 15% interest rates in the 1980s. And they can tell you how tech companies innovated or adapted in those times.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 years ahead ones are pretty useful because they can tell you what to do tomorrow. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes your peers, sometimes they're ahead, sometimes you're ahead. So that's been really useful relationships and friendships. And then the 5 years are
Mm-hmm.
perfectly in between. So in our case, it was like last round I brought on more angels who had just IPO'd or about to IPO, who can
Mm-hmm.
kind of give me advice on how to prepare potentially for that world. So yeah, every point getting mentors, and I think that's the most helpful in scaling or building anything is or going through a process someone else has, because they can teach you all the mistakes and hopefully you can avoid some. So
Okay, and probably a question that our listeners would have, right? How did you persuade the mentors to want to mentor you? I mean, obviously, if
oh
the angel invested, they would be motivated to do it. But like, what about mentors who have not invested in you?
yeah, so I have a few basic rules that have helped me kind of build the system. And I've been lucky as well to use whatever network I had, but it started out with my time at Berkeley. At Berkeley, I was lucky that I was a student, and Berkeley has the most number of alums in Silicon Valley. So I could ping people and say, hey, I'm a silly student at Berkeley. Would you mind taking 15 minutes to chat?
Mm-hmm.
And lots of people said yes. And turns out there's lots of startup founders, billionaires, VCs who are
Mm-hmm.
ex Berkeley alum. You have to find them, but they're there. And a few rules I had. Everyone I met, I said I would ask a set of questions, and then
Mm-hmm.
typically this humans who are humble don't know the answers to everything. And so at some point in conversation, they may be like, "Oh, I don't know the answer," or I may be like, "Oh, I'd love to learn more about some particular topic." And I'd always ask, "Do you know someone who would be willing to answer the questions about X, Y, Z? Do you
Ah,
know someone else that
referrals.
you can introduce me to?"
Yeah.
And I figured if I ask everyone for two, then they're more likely to give me one. But those who give me two, then it's exponential growth. One person gives you two, two becomes four, eight, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So that was one rule to build network. That's how I know everyone in Indonesia is through 100 cold emails, 4 people I met, two
Mm-hmm.
introduced me to one person, one introduced me to his father introduced me to, brought me to dinner with 6 other people. Everyone I know in
Wow.
Indonesia is from those 100 cold emails.
This is
Uh,
like exponential. It's like
yeah,
almost
but it
like this
is.
kind of graph.
Yeah, if you ask everyone for a couple of intros. The second tip, and I think this is the most helpful in a day
Mm-hmm.
and age like this, is with mentors. I really people that I want to keep answering, and I never have a formal mentor. I just call them mentors, but they're just people who keep answering my dumb questions. Uh, what I do is ones I really care about. So let's say recently I spent time with the president of Tesla
Mm-hmm.
and or the CEO of Amazon.com, and I asked them questions and they told me answers, and I would write it down because I actually want to implement it. But I would
Mm-hmm.
set a to-do reminder for 3 months from now to ping them and be like, "Hey, I took your advice, I implemented it. Here's what something that worked. Here's something that
Amazing.
didn't.
Yeah.
Ask a question." And
Mm-hmm.
I found that was really engaging because one, when in the reverse side, when someone asked me something, if they email me 3 months later and say, "I implemented what you said," whoa, that feels so nice. Then number
Mm-hmm.
two, when you're like, "Hey, something didn't work," that makes me very curious. It makes me like, let me work out this problem with you because I'm now invested in this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I've done that over the years with many folks. And it's not disingenuous. It's not a trick. It's like real things I implemented,
Genuine.
real
Yeah.
questions I have. It's not disingenuous, but I think it is a genuine way of creating rapport with someone and getting someone to be invested.
Mm-hmm.
People who are way better. Like I have no business talking to president of Tesla or CEO of Amazon. There's no reason that they should talk to me. I'm not worth anything. They're not investors. Uh, but they keep answering my questions and dumb questions. So
So over a period of time, like they informally adopt you then.
yes. Oh, I don't know if they think of it that way. At least they keep answering my emails. So and being willing to chat at various events. So I think that's been pretty helpful in building a set of mentors that I can ask questions from.
Okay, that's amazing, Moses. I think that like that's probably going to be, the most helpful part about like the podcast to our listeners. Actually, this part about building mentors. So Moses, thank you so much for sharing your invaluable insights with us today. Where can our listeners find you? Are you mostly available on LinkedIn, or are you by some chance on X or something?
I'm not very good at social media because I never know what to say that is politically correct. I'll get myself in too much trouble. But ping me anytime, Moses at Xendit.co. Just remind
Mm.
me how we met, or where you came across something. That's another useful tip when people say, "Oh, I watched something," or "I heard you say this," and I agree or disagree. It always piques
Hmm.
interest versus the normal cold thing. So Moses at Xendit.co. Ping me on LinkedIn too. Any of those forums work for connecting.
All right. Thank you so much, Moses. Great to have you here today.
Sweet. Thanks so much for your time.